and welcome everyone. Our speaker tonight needs no introduction, at least among this group. Alan is director at Allen Patient and Company, which is a double award-winning chartered accountancy firm. And of course, Alan is our treasurer as well. So please welcome Alan to this meeting. Alan, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Amantu. So this is my version of A Christmas Carol. As it's nearly Christmas, I thought that rather than hear me talking about accountancy, you would prefer instead to hear the familiar story of the Victorian miser, Ebenezer Scrooge, and with apologies to Charles Dicken. It may be, however, that some of the characters mentioned are already familiar to you. 'Twas nearly midnight on Christmas Eve, and Ebenezer Scrooge had just said goodnight to his clerk, Bob Cratchit, and locked up the shop for the night. Scrooge is proprietor of a long-standing business called Scrooge and Marley. He is well known as not only being a miser, but as being rather short-sighted in business. In fact, he had not really moved on since the death of his former business partner, Jacob Marley. So Scrooge shuffled off to bed with a glass of port to keep him company. But before he drifted off to sleep, he had time to reflect on the day's events and his life in general. In reality, he was not really happy that Bob was taking tomorrow off work, meaning that the shop had to be closed for the whole day. However, on the plus side, Scrooge was content that he had control of his life and the people in it, and most important of all, was able to keep his costs down. For example, he does all his own bookkeeping and labouring all day over an old desk perched on a high store. This means that he does not have to pay accountants to do this work because he thinks they're much too expensive. Bob had suggested that his friend Alan of Allen Patient & Co., Chartered Accountants, could do a better job. In addition, this would allow Scrooge to focus on taking things forward so that he can work on the business, not in it. However, Scrooge just said, "Bah humbug." Reluctantly, Scrooge uses the Artful Dodger & Co. to prepare his end-of-year accounts and agree his tax liabilities with HMRC. Invariably, this means that Scrooge does not understand his own accounts or how the tax payable is calculated. And because they are presented to him at the last moment, he does not have the opportunity to get together the money needed to pay his taxes because they're due the very next day. He had heard that Artful was unqualified and operating out of a back bedroom, but this did not bother him. Scrooge had met the Artful Dodger many years ago in a local alehouse and had been impressed not only by how cheap his fees were, but how much money he could save by following his tax-saving advice. And although, to be honest, he thought their scheme sounded dodgy, his attitude was, why not? It's their neck on the line, not mine, isn't it? In fact, HMRC are highly suspicious that the Artful Dodger & Co. company are cooking the books and treat him and Scrooge accordingly. The business has not grown in years, and Scrooge is always moaning about how much tax and national insurance he is paying. In fact, the business is shrinking because he has no marketing or business plan in place. Every now and then he loses a customer through upsetting them, or they just die of old age. One former customer of his is currently suing, and because the business is not incorporated, Scrooge stands to lose everything he has. You may also not be surprised to learn that he has no succession plan in place to pass on the business to Scrooge Jr., nor has he ever considered putting a pension plan in place. In fact, with no pension, Scrooge is destined to be a miserable old age when he shuts up shop for the last time. And it did worry him when Bob told him that Alan had advised that unless he did some careful tax planning, that he stood to pay a huge amount of inheritance tax when he died on the old factory freehold and his home. However, he chose not to listen to this and again referred to bar humbug. Also, although Bob works full-time and does not work elsewhere, Scrooge insisted that it was on a self-employed basis, meaning that not only was Scrooge saving lots of PAY and national insurance, which actually Bob had to pay instead, Bob had no employee rights and so could be dismissed without notice. Bob would not be paid for taking Christmas Day off, as he was not entitled to any paid holidays. Bob had often said this made him feel demotivated and exploited, or words to that effect. Then there was Bob's son, Tiny Tim, who was fired by Scrooge a while ago when he fell ill. These days he's trying to make his way in the world as a self-employed plumber. He has only a few customers, but because he is so frail, people do feel sorry for him and they try to get him more work. However, Scrooge was not so happy that he received a letter that morning from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, opening up a tax investigation, which amongst other things, questioned those dodgy expenses that the Artful Dodger was claiming in the accounts, and also asked why Bob's wages were shown as consultancy, as he appeared to be an employee. It looked like HMRC were seeking to charge Scrooge a backlog of PAYE, national insurance, and pension contributions, as well as penalties for non-compliance with payroll regulations. Anyway, by now Scrooge was in deep sleep. However, he was awoken by the clank of chains by what appeared to be the ghost of his deceased partner, Jacob Miley. Jacob pointed a ghostly finger at Scrooge and accused him of having taken advantage of his poor widow, because although they had built the business together, Scrooge had failed to pay her any share of the profits because there had been no partnership agreement obliging him to do so. What's more, Jacob said the partnership should have been incorporated years ago to save tax and give some security. Scrooge bowed his head in shame as he realized that this was true, as he was still a sole trader. Before he left, with chains still clinking, Jacob advised that Scrooge should take heed of the advice of the next visitor, the ghost of accountants present, and what could be the future. This was otherwise known as Alan, who, unlike the Artful Dodger, was a chartered accountant. But not to worry, because his visit would be free of charge and without obligation. When Alan arrived, Scrooge learned sadly that the Artful Dodger would not take any responsibility for the dodgy tax returns or accounts that he himself, and that Scrooge, that is, would have to pay any extra amounts of tax or penalties that arose out of the investigation. However, Scrooge was pleasantly surprised to hear that he was not without salvation, but he would need to change accountants to Alan's firm. Alan had a tax expert called Tony to help with the tax investigation and minimize the tax and penalties payable. Tony was a gamekeeper turned poacher, so called because he used to work for HMRC and knew the inspector's job better than they did themselves. Also, Alan would help sort out a proper contract of employment for Bob, which would make him happy too. Scrooge listened intently as Alan advised that he should go limited and devote his time to working on the business, not within it, and that a much happier life was still possible. Not only would this provide security for Scrooge's home and other assets should the customer's case against Scrooge go against him, causing him to go bust, but through Alan's careful tax planning, he would pay a lot less tax. For example, his rate of business tax would reduce from 45% to 19%. Alan suggested that a newly created company called Scrooge and Marley Limited became a client of his as soon as possible, which turned out to be a relatively easy process handled by Alan to cause a complete change in his fortunes. Now Scrooge's attitude was very, very different. Alan looked very carefully at Scrooge's business affairs and further advised, when converting the sole trader business to limited, Alan would take advantage of a one-off tax break by giving a valuation to the goodwill of the old business, which when transferred to the new company created a loan to Scrooge, which could later be paid back to him free of tax. Once the company was set up, Alan would arrange to pay Scrooge a small salary as director of the company, which would be allowed as a tax-deductible item in the accounts. Then a much larger dividend could be voted to Scrooge as the business owner out of profits after tax. Alan pointed out that because of the special taxation rules for dividends, as long as Scrooge's overall personal income did not exceed £50,000 in a tax year, that he would pay no personal tax on the first £2,000 of dividend and only 7.5% on the balance. Above £50,000, the tax rate on dividends was 32.5%, still better than the 45% he was used to. There was even scope for paying Scrooge Jr. a salary too, once he joined the company, as well as extending the dividend advantages mentioned to him when he became a shareholder. Overall, he would pay a lot less tax and national insurance. Alan recommended preparing and following a well thought out business plan together with a marketing plan, where Scrooge's personal and business goals were identified and eventually obtained by regular focus on predetermined targets. This was possible through regular meetings with Alan, backed up with timely management accounts, which compared actual results with those targets. Scrooge soon realized that the extra focus on his business plan now gave him what he always wanted, which was to expand the business whilst at the same time keep control over his costs, so that at last he would realize the profitability he always imagined he would have. Alan would take over his bookkeeping using Xero, as well as providing his accountancy and tax planning services at a modest cost. Xero automated the process of bookkeeping, and Scrooge was delighted to see that invoices were prepared and sent to customers instantly, thereby speeding up his cash flow cycle. This freed up Scrooge and his employees to do what they did best: market the business and provide the services of the trade. As a bonus, it would give Scrooge the opportunity to show that he could be a good guy, spending time with his customers, thereby dispelling his image as an old miser. Alan and his tax manager, Tony, would look at his personal and business assets to develop and implement a strategy to save him as much inheritance tax as possible, whilst providing a platform for Scrooge Jr. to carry on with the business intact once Scrooge had retired. Alan would introduce Scrooge to an independent financial advisor to organise a proper pension so that he would not have to work up to the date of his death or exist on a diet of gruel when asking for more, which could well lead to it being a big issue. Alan would look at his contracts of service with contractors and contracts of employment to ensure that they are fair and sound enough to withstand challenges from HMRC, and possibly some and also to protect him in the instances of an embittered former member of staff. Scrooge knew in his bones that this would not only make Bob more happy in the workplace, but more productive and positive in the workplace too. Also, Alan's tax saving schemes, although they did actually save tax, were not dodgy, and they included putting money aside into pensions. Alan suggested that Scrooge introduce him to Tiny Tim so that he would make sure that he was properly registered as being self-employed with HMRC. A review of Tim's business affairs would make sure that he was deducting all allowable expenses in his trade, such as travel, as well as the cost of tools and other materials needed in his work. Self-employment requires less administration and consequently has cheaper accountancy fees. This would suit Tim at the moment, but if anything went wrong, for example, he has a financial claim because his pipework has sprung a leak, causing damage, he is personally liable. In the view of the lower costs of being a sole trader, he may not need to be too worried about this because he is confident that his work is good. Besides which, he will have insurance and does not own the hovel in which he lives. Scrooge realized that if he had been more successful and had more time to devote to his personal life, that he may not have lost that girl that he loved so dearly. But was it now too late? Scrooge decided there and then to change accountants to Alan Patient & Co. He realized that Alan was more than an accountant. He could rely on him to be, in effect, his financial director, as well as a trusted business advisor. Alan also knew many other people that could help Scrooge to live a happier life. There was, for example, a mortgage broker that he knew who could arrange a mortgage to buy that cottage by the sea, as well as a therapist to straighten out his crooked back. And finally, Scrooge was surprised to learn that although Alan's fees were more than artfuls, that they were actually affordable, and when taken as a whole, with the tax he would save legally, represented much better value for money. Well, my friends, I know that I've plundered heavily from A Christmas Carol. I'm sorry about that, Chaz. And although this tale is obviously fictitious, maybe some of it will sound familiar to you. But unlike in Scrooge's world, I am real and I can really help. So please look out for a modern day Mr. or Ms. Scrooge, as I'm sure I can help them lead a better life, so that the gloomy predictions of Christmas future do not become a reality. Also, please look at our website for real-life examples of how I and my team have helped people who are no longer prepared to live their lives as Muppets. I wonder if anyone has any questions. Well, I wonder.
I'm definitely going to be in touch, actually. That's actually really good. So I'm going to come to your website, and yeah, I think we'll be in touch.
All right. Well, thank you. I think it's an interesting website. Maybe that's just a personal view, but have a good look. And obviously, it's a bit difficult to have an actual meeting just now, but one way or another, we can meet up and talk about things.
Has anybody got any other questions for Alan? Okay, can I hand over to you, Bosie, for the vote of thanks, please?
Okay. I'm just going to say a big thank you to Alan, and I really like the way you've put the story together using a Christmas story, but also learning how we can deal with our pension, how we can get our books together, which I think it's quite, probably looking at it from my point of view as a teacher, that you need to make things, like easy and let people have an understanding of it. So thank you very much. And like Trevor said as well, I will definitely be pointing people in your direction, at least so that people can go on site, read the story, and see how you can help them. Thank you so much, Alan. Very useful.
You're welcome.
Susan, I'll
Yes.
hand over back to you then.
Thank you. So have we got any other business?
Okay. I have a small announcement to make. So Lola's Homeless will be sharing their details with us shortly on what exactly is going to happen on 19th, which I will circulate on the WhatsApp group, where we'll need to give the names, email addresses, and phone numbers of interested people to her for safeguarding and other formalities. So please do look out for that message. To put this in context, Lola's Homeless was the winner of Community Group of the Year award in our award ceremony.
Okay, anybody else anything to say before we close? Okay, so the next meeting will be on Monday, the 21st of December. And obviously Himanshu very kindly will send the link to us before that. So I'd like to close this meeting, please, by doing the final toast. Rotary in peace throughout the world.
Rotary peace throughout the world.
Rotary and peace throughout the world.
Rotary peace throughout the world.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this meeting. Thank you, Alan, once again. Thank you, Himanshu, for all your tech, as you always do. Thank you, Bosie, for leading the team. And look forward to seeing everybody next Monday. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.